Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel. Hey everybody, it's Thursday again, and it's time for another Thirsty for Theory Thursday. I'm here today with my co-host, Christy Lynn. Hey Christy. We have as our special guest today, Mr. Andrew Whitehead.
How are you doing today, Mr. Jeff?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thank you for taking the time to join us today on Thirsty for Theory Thursday. We have a very diminutive panel today. We only have the lovely and talented Obi-Wan Benobi, who's joined us on only a sporadic connection, and maybe he can try and chime in. But if he can't, I'm sure by the end of the video he'll be able to be able to come in. Over the long term. Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel. Hey everybody, it's Thursday again, and it's time for another Thirsty for Theory Thursday. I'm here today with my co-host, Christy Lynn. Hey Christy. We have as our special guest today, Mr. Andrew Whitehead.
How are you doing today, Mr. Jeff?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thank you for taking the time to join us today on Thirsty for Theory Thursday. We have a very diminutive panel today. We only have the lovely and talented Obi-Wan Benobi, who's joined us on only a sporadic connection, and maybe he can try and chime in. But if he can't, I'm sure by the end of the video he'll be able to be able to come in. Over the long term today, we're going to talk about item FL, which is an absolutely critical piece of evidence in the Stephen Avery case. But before we dive in, I wanted to give everybody a chance to meet and greet our friend Andrew, who's joined us on the Foul Play Discord channel. Please come and join us. Andrew's on periodically, and you can come talk to him live. I would say that Andrew has burst onto the scene with a lot of enthusiasm, and people are really enjoying his videos. So Andrew, could you take a second and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Andrew Whitehead. The name of my YouTube channel is Making Two Murderers. I kind of come up with the name after a little while. You know, I did a few videos and I was trying to think of a name, and I said, well, the show is Making a Murderer, obviously, but they didn't make just one. They essentially made two. So that was the thought process, the name for my channel. And then since then, I have just, you know, basically made videos of everything that comes to mind. I enjoy it a lot. I started out doing it just to get the thought, everything, all of the inconsistencies from the show and from the case. All these things would go through my head, and I didn't have anybody in my immediate circle that really cared enough to sit there and have conversations about it. So I basically started my channel just to get all of the thoughts out of my head and basically just see where it went.
Well, if you're going to do a series of videos on the inconsistencies in this case, I think you're going to be doing videos until about 2050. What do you think?
No, that's absolutely true. That's one good thing about this case. Well, hopefully we're not doing it till 2050. Hopefully, you know, some things happen between now and then.
Stop?
No, I wouldn't stop, but you're definitely right that there's so many angles to this story. And I think that's one of the most fascinating things about it. I've always been interested in the show Forensic Files. I've always been interested in the show Snap, shows like that. And when Making a Murderer first came out, I watched it quite a few times, but I would just have all these thoughts to myself, and that would be the extent of it. Well, eventually, I was at work one day, and my boss was asking me a couple of questions about it. And once I started talking, I realized that I couldn't stop talking about it. So that's when I kind of, came to the conclusion that I'm going to put these thoughts to better use than just keeping them in my head and just to vent and see what other people think. Little did I know that there was already a community that existed, because I never really went on YouTube to find out if people was talking about this prior to me starting my channel. But once I started it, it kind of opened up the world of the YouTube Making a Murderer community. Here we are.
I was also surprised at how large the community was when I first started getting into it as well, and the quality of the people. I mean, there really are some top caliber people who have selflessly dedicated their time, in a lot of cases their money, towards the goal of rooting out the corruption in Wisconsin and sort of not letting this level of shenanigans stand. And some people do it because they were wrongfully convicted themselves. Some people do it because the thought that this level of corruption could exist in the United States of America is just beyond the pale. And everybody pretty much has their own reasons. Wouldn't you say, Christy?
Absolutely. Everybody has their own reasons for getting involved in this. I have several people because they were wrongfully convicted, other people just because it interests them. There's a broad range of interest in this case. There's a broad range of expertise and knowledge and personalities, and I love the people that we've met. And Andrew, you're the newest addition. I love that you've joined us. It's great having you here. I've heard a lot about you. People have been talking about you for a couple months now and how you were this new and upcoming YouTuber, and I'm glad you finally made it over to us.
Yeah, I am too. I was aware of foul play mainly, for the jail calls. I've seen other tidbits of information, but I really wasn't aware of what it is that y'all do. And ever since y'all have reached out, we have started to get to know each other. This is probably one of the better groups that's out there, and I'm really happy to be a part of it for sure.
Well, thank you. We're happy to have you here.
Yeah, we're kind of famous in our videos for having just a large panel. Nobody is the star of the show. It's really more of if you have a big TV and watch our videos on a big TV, you can read that together everybody achieves more, and that's really our motto. Everybody does what they're good at and contributes, and we really like that. So if it would also be great, I think you have a new sort of video series on your channel called The Mysteries of Manitowoc. And I'm sure you're not addressing why the McDonald's near Earl Avery's makes 50% more than every other McDonald's in Wisconsin. You want to tell us about that series?
Yeah, well, as soon as I started my YouTube channel, I got into just about every Facebook group that you could imagine. I started meeting people, so on. Well, I met this guy from Germany. His name's Ronnie. And he would send me information by the truckload through Messenger. And I was like, man, this is a lot of information. Well, he's like, well, if you think this is something, you ain't seen anything yet. So he put me in contact with a guy named Thomas Myrtle from Ontario, Canada. And Thomas is extremely intelligent and probably one of the best researchers so far. Now, keep in mind, I've only been doing it for 2 months, but probably one of the best researchers that I've come across comes to looking and finding information that most people can't find. And one night he got in touch with me and I kind of talked him into doing a live on my channel. And it got a really good response. And he brought up the idea, actually, that he said, look, I have so much information just about Manitowoc alone that we ought to do a series. He didn't, have a name for it. He said, but, to cover all of these different cases, he said there's tons of missing person cases in and around Manitowoc and of young females that date back to the early 1900s. And he was giving me all this information, and I said, well, absolutely, we'll do it. I said, I'll come up with a name. And I called it Mysteries of Manitowoc, but in hindsight, I probably should have called it Mysteries of Wisconsin, because it's not just in Manitowoc, but so far it's been a successful series. We've just finished episode 2, and people really seem to enjoy it. I really enjoy speaking with Thomas Myrtle. He's pretty good, and he recently joined the Foul Play community as well.
Well, we're real anxious to talk to him, and we'll be sure to leave a link to your channel and episode 1 of the Mysteries of Manitowoc series in particular in the comments, in the description of this video here, so people can know where to go. I think that's an excellent introduction to it. We're here so moving on, we are here today to talk about item FL. And item FL, wouldn't you say, is probably one of the most important pieces of evidence in the whole case. As a matter of fact, if there's one thing that you can believe Ken Kratz about, it's the importance of item FL to his case. You have anything to say to that, Christy?
I do. Give me 1 second. Okay. In his book, chapter 8 is titled The Bullet. And I won't read you the whole chapter because it's a lot of everything we've already heard. But these 3 paragraphs I find important. The most important pieces of evidence to come out of this garage search, it turned out, were bullets. More precisely, 2 bullet fragments. Special Agent Kevin Heimerl, a young DCI investigator, had been assigned the responsibility of coordinating the search of the garage that evening. He would testify at trial that 1 bullet fragment had been located in a crack in the garage's cement floor, flattened until it resembled the head of a roofing nail. It was too deformed to be of much use, held no DNA, and couldn't be matched to any specific gun. The second bullet told a different tale. As he would tell the jury, Heimerl discovered this bullet while on his hands and knees as he shined his flashlight under a large green air compressor at the back wall of the garage. The bullet was almost intact, and he carefully recovered the object, placing it in a small evidence box for later processing at the lab. It would bear traces of Teresa Hallback's DNA. This was the forensic discovery I had hoped for, physical evidence tying Stephen Avery to Teresa's murder. This bullet was the game changer. It would make my case. On the witness stand a year later, State Crime Lab firearms expert Bill Newhouse testified that this bullet had been fired from Stephen Avery's rifle, the one found hanging over his bed, using ammunition found in his scuffed desk drawers to the exclusion of all other firearms and ammunition in the world. That's it.
A game changer. Wow.
Game changer.
Andrew, do you have any comments about game? What does the term game changer mean to you?
Game changer means to me that, in his opinion, he thought the entire case would swing on that bullet. That would be overwhelming, powerful evidence that Stephen Avery killed Teresa Hallback.
I think there's that definitely says that to me. You know, to me it does imply one more little thing, right? I mean, to me, there's some sort of implication that the game is somehow going poorly, right? Because if this were a case where, like, it was this overwhelming victory from the moment that Stephen got arrested to the moment that he got put away for murder, then you wouldn't really call it a game changer because the game was going along swimmingly before. Doesn't that have to be, going along poorly, or it's off to a slow start or something before a game changer can kick in?
Yeah, and I think to embolden the statement you just made, we could think about it in this way. The bullet, essentially, according to the state's theory, is the cause of death of Teresa Hallback. And once the skull fragment are evaluated and the determination is made that the skull fragment had an entrance wound that was similar to a 22 caliber long rifle, then I think that from there, it was a matter of just finding a bullet or a piece of evidence that can tie Stephen Avery to being the one that killed Teresa Halbach, via the bullet, and the rifle. And I think there's such a huge piece of evidence, and I want to say Zellner even said that herself in Making a Murderer Season 2, that really the whole case swings on that, because that is literally the state's theory of being the cause of death to Teresa Halbach.
It certainly is. So let's rewind a little bit and remind ourselves how we get to the point where the so-called garage search that Christy alluded to happened in the first place. Because there's as with the whole case, there's so much shenanigans going on. It's very good to really put yourself in context. And one thing that really helped us get into context was those jail calls. That we know that Christy has listened to 839, I think, unless she's listened to more today. She hasn't told me about it.
Not yet.
Christy, what was going on in Stephen Avery's life around the end of February in 2006?
Stephen had just filed his $36 million lawsuit against Manitowoc County for a measly $400,000. He hired Dean Strang.
Settled it.
Settled, yes. He settled for a measly $400,000. Dean Strang had just become his attorney. I believe they might have been in talks with Jerry Buting. Jerry Buting was about to come on board as well. Property bond paperwork was put together. Property bond paperwork had been filed. The judge was going to set a date to rule on property bond. Stephen was excited he was getting released. And the paperwork for the bond was submitted Friday, February 24th. And on Monday, February 27th, we know that they went after Brendan for not the first time, but the first time really badly. It was when it started. They interrogated him from the 27th to the 1st until they had enough to implicate him in the murder, destroy Stephen's alibi, and have a reason to go back in the garage and crawl around on the floor again.
Isn't that amazing, Andrew? When you hear it in that context, can you imagine how bad it would have been for the state if he had actually got out of prison on bond? What do you think he might have been able to do? I think he might have been able to call up Aaron Keller from the news, who seemed to be a sympathetic reporter, show him his trailer. Look, they took apart my trailer, and they didn't find a damn piece of evidence. I think he would have been able to do a lot of damage to the state's case if he had gotten out of prison, or out of jail, I should say. What do you think, Andrew?
Well, no, absolutely. I would have to agree with you 100%. I mean, there was no way they wanted him to be free, out on bail, waiting for trial, and then to be able to get out and essentially, in their minds, probably they're sitting there thinking that that's gonna completely go against what they're wanting to prove. The theory that they're wanting to push, the narrative that they're wanting to push, is going to be refuted with, like you just said. I mean, the evidence, they've already went through his trailer, they went through the garage. There's evidence that everything was taken out of the garage prior to item FL being found. So, I mean, yeah, I agree 100%.
So Christy, how would you say, Stephen did quite a bit of talking to Dolores. How do you think that in general, Stephen and the people he was talking to sort of felt about the quality of the state's case prior to Brendan's confession?
Well, Stephen wasn't really that worried about the state's case against him because he knew that he was innocent. He knew that that was not his blood in her car. He knew that was not her key in his bedroom. Um, he kept saying they really didn't have nothing. They really don't have nothing. And he was pretty confident in that. He was, the state really had nothing. He was innocent. He knew that. He had no reason to be worried. He had zero reason to suspect that this was really going to hold up. He just didn't believe this could happen twice. He, with everything that had gone on with the Avery bill and the fact that innocent people weren't supposed to be sitting in a jail cell, he was thoroughly convinced that he was going to come out on the right side of this. He wasn't worried about their evidence. He wasn't worried about their evidence at all at that point.
So the state needed a game changer. They go out and get Brendan. Brendan confesses, but yeah, that's not the linchpin they need, right? They need something else. And as you said, Andrew, they go to the garage and they miraculously discover the game changer, right? So one thing we're going to put up for the viewers who actually get to watch this. I know a lot of people listen to it on their ride home or whatnot, but have the chance to watch it on YouTube. What you'll see on YouTube now is a picture that was taken on November 11th of one of the original searches. And there's actually two pictures. We'll flip back and forth once. One is the full quality image, and the other one shows the metadata for that picture, which you can find openly released as one of the photos that was FOIA'd by Henberry, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you, Henberry, for doing that. One of the people who's dedicated time, or maybe it was Ricky. I can't remember which. I apologize. I'm pretty sure it was Henberry. And it shows a flashlight. You can see a flashlight, an orange flashlight on the ground, shining underneath a toolbox. And what is right next to that toolbox? Andrew, do you want to tell us what's right next to that toolbox?
Right next to that toolbox is item FL. That's the game changer.
But this was November 11th, not March 2nd.
I think what Andrew meant to say was this is where item FL was supposed to be. This particular picture was taken in November 2005, November 11th to be exact, and there does not appear to be a bullet there. And as Andrew said a minute ago, during this search of the garage, they claim to have taken every single item out of there one by one. So if item FL were there, why didn't they find it in November 2005? If Stephen is already in jail, how did that bullet get there? How was she shot and killed in the garage on October 31st? Stephen's arrested November 9th. They search the garage totally and completely on November 11th, and they find no bullet. They find no bullet until they go back almost 4 months later. And when they are there 4 months later, not only do they find this one bullet, they also find item FK. FK was found in a crack in the concrete, coincidentally also with no blood or DNA on it. So how come these bullets weren't found the first time they were there? How did they, if they did a thorough, complete search on November 11th, 2005, and took every single item out of there, how were these two bullets not found? How was FL not seen underneath the air compressor? And how was FK not found sitting in the crack right there in the middle of the garage? I find it very hard to believe. It seems very suspicious. And the fact that they want us to believe that narrative, they want us to believe we got nothing wrong. We got our man. We did this right. This is a solid investigation. Why all the mistakes? How did you miss the bullet on November 11th? How did you not find that bullet until March 2nd?
They did the hammering of the concrete because that Brendan said that the blood soaked in through the cracks in the concrete. And they find item FK in that same crack, but yet in those cracks too, but there's no blood on FK either. So,
For me,
yeah, please, Ben, go ahead.
Wasn't there were searches on the 5th and the 6th also, and or was it the 5th and 6th in the garage?
Well, the picture was certainly taken in the 11th, but on the 11th. But you'd imagine that since it was a missing person, they at least did a cursory search of the entire property just to see if they could find Teresa somewhere.
But
which included the garage.
within that time, but by the 11th, they were taking things out of that garage, vehicles, debris, and if you look in the photos, there's like a cord or some sort there, like it's right behind the toolbox, or not the little tool case, that
Yeah.
black tool case, and in between the compressor and the toolbox, the red toolbox, you can see this red wire that's down there. Now, if they were down there moving those items around, you would have expected them to have at least saw that item FL if it was actually sitting there. But
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. But they didn't find it. And, that is probably, one of the greatest mysteries of Manitowoc that hopefully we're going to get to the bottom today of how it got there. For me, we like to talk about theory for Thursday, thirsty for theory Thursday, the name that nobody can say. My opinion is the state grabbed one of the bullets from the outside and put it there. And before they gave it to Sherry Colhane, they rubbed something of Teresa's on it so that it would come up with positive DNA. And much to her dismay, she contaminated the negative sample, and it shouldn't even have been admitted anyway. But that's the subject of another video. What do you think, Andrew? What's your theory?
I'm right there with you. Exactly what you said. That bullet, item FL, was shot, in my opinion, through the wall of that garage at some point. I'm not sure on what occasion, but I absolutely agree that DNA was planted on that bullet, and it was given to Sherry Colhane. Obviously it came back as Teresa Halbach's DNA. I 100% believe, and I feel, in my mind, it's a fact, but obviously I'm not going to say that it's a fact, but in my mind, item FL was 100% was not shot through Teresa Halbach.
Well, this is one of the reasons why I'm really excited to talk to you, because I personally know nothing about guns or weapons or ammunition, and you know a crap ton about that. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind taking the time to sort of walk us through, what you know and understand about this, about this bullet fragment. About the type of gun that it was shot out of, about how this bullet how this bullet could have started on the outside and actually made it through the inside to be on the ground.
Okay. Well, essentially, there's many aspects to but I'll just start with the basic. A 22 caliber rifle, in terms of rifles, now we're not talking about pistols, but in terms of rifles, it is literally, if not the smallest, I've researched and I haven't found one that has a smaller caliber, but it is literally the smallest caliber bullet in terms of rifles. So to give you a sense, I actually, I own a 22 rifle. I've been shooting, I probably shot 20, let's say, anywhere from 10 to 20,000 rounds of 22 in my life. And the reason why that's so high, I've grown up around guns. I still own many guns. And when I was younger, I actually shot 22 long rifle in competition, many competition. And so I don't want to say, an expert or anything like that, because I'm not, but I have a lot of experience with this caliber. And I've heard comments from people, whether it be through YouTube or on Facebook, regardless of if they think Stephen Avery is innocent or guilty. I've heard comments that a 22 long rifle could absolutely enter and exit the skull. And the way that it's implied is that it could just do that with ease. Now, there's no question that a 22 long rifle will enter skull. But where I get concerned is when people try to claim that, like the state did, for instance, when you imply that someone was shot in the head and that you have a through and through shot, meaning that the bullet entered and exited and wound up ricocheting off of some items supposedly to with enough force to have wood and paint chips embedded in it, that immediately threw a red flag with me, because I said, well, first of all, I'm not convinced in any fashion that a 22 rifle can exit the skull. I know it can go in, but I can't fathom it going all the way through the skull. Now, that's not to say that it can't be done, because it can be done. There's many variables that's included in that. Some of them being how much, the distance between the end of the barrel and the skull, for instance.
Can I ask you a couple of questions?
Right.
You're already past my level of education. Do you have a picture for us about that shows us of the approximate size of such a bullet?
Yeah, absolutely. This picture that I'm putting up now, it is on the left is a 22 long rifle bullet. This is the bullet. It is a hollow point. It's a lead bullet with a copper jacket.
And what does that mean, hollow point?
All right. For instance, if you have a full metal jacket, you have what's called a hollow point, and you have what's called a full metal jacket. A full metal jacket is where you have a completely solid projectile, and it is essentially made to puncture through whatever it hits. You want it to do, you want it to go through, you want it to do immense damage to whatever it's hitting. A hollow point, and a lot of people, and this is a horrible name to nickname them. I don't know why hollow points got this nickname, but they're actually called cop killers. And the reason why they got that name is because, now not a 22, keep in mind, but in other caliber bullets, they're called that because they're typically have the power to punch through the armor. I couldn't tell you, but a hollow point, essentially, what you're seeing right there in that picture on the left-hand side is a 22 caliber hollow point. And what it's made to do is when it enters whatever it hits, it's made to flare outward. So it's made to, instead of just punching through the item like a full metal jacket, the hollow point is designed to flare out and cause more damage. Now, with a 22 long rifle bullet, you're not going to get that much flare from it. You're going to get, even with the hollow point, you're going to get more of a mushroom effect because the projectile is so small. But if you start talking about, for instance, I put it up next in this photo, I put it up next to a 30-30 rifle bullet. 30-30 is still, yeah, and it's still one of your smaller rifles. 30-30 is really only accurate in most cases. Now, it obviously can go further than 150 yards, but in most cases, a 30-30 is pretty dead on at 100 to 150 yards, and you can see the size difference between the two. So,
right. So how accurate, how far, what's the sort of the accuracy distance of that smaller bullet?
The smaller bullet? Well, and that's what's kind of tricky about this. Anytime you start talking about accuracy, you're going to have a bunch of different variables, as with anything. But, I mean, the bullet itself can travel up to 1.5 miles. But this is a misconception. I've heard people mention this. Well, I had somebody argue with me one day, And he said, well, a 22 bullet can absolutely go through the skull of a human. It can go up to 1.5 miles. And I said, well, pull up the ballistics chart on a 22 long rifle bullet. And what you're going to find is, yes, absolutely, it will travel 1.5 miles. But that is under the assumption that you would give it enough room for the drop, because after, I want to say 500 yards, that bullet starts to fall dramatically. So for instance, if let's say you were standing up and you shot a 22 long rifle straight parallel, it's not going to travel 1.5 miles because it's going to hit the ground before it even gets there due to the drop. But to give you an idea, bullets are rated in a couple of different ratings. The one I refer to the most is called feet per second. Okay. A 22 rifle, like I stated earlier, is one of the smallest calibers of rifle you can get. It's the smallest. It has an 1,100 feet per second rate, which when you convert that to miles per hour, that's about the bullets coming out of that gun at about 750 miles per hour. Now, if you do not know anything about ammunition, if you don't know anything about guns, that sounds like a scary number. And that's where a lot of the misconception comes in. So what I did for this podcast is I researched some typical bullet statistics. And the one that's in the photo, the 30-30, for instance, that's a lot larger caliber than a 22, but it's still one of the smaller in terms of all of your rifle calibers. So a 30-30 has a rating of 2,390 feet per second, which is 1,629 miles per hour. So right off the bat, you can see the discrepancy in the feet per second and the power just between these two bullets in that photo.
It's going to go a lot further before it drops, Eddie.
Yeah, absolutely. It has way more power and it has way more velocity. So a 22 accurately would, it's going to have a bunch of different variables that comes into play. But if we're talking 100, 200 yards and you have somebody that can shoot really well, then it's going to be pretty accurate. But accuracy doesn't imply power. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so no, I don't think any of us think that Teresa was shot from far away.
No, absolutely.
So what do these imply? And I think basically, how can we tell from the caliber or the type of the bullet? I think you mentioned it was a hollow point.
Right.
It sounds, based on what you said, that type of bullet isn't meant to continue at a high velocity once it hits something, because it sort of mushrooms, and something gets bigger, it's going to make it more difficult to travel through rather than continue to puncture.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're 100% right on that. So let's just use the state's claim for a second. They claim that Stephen Avery is standing near, they don't give an exact, obviously they can't give an exact distance, but they claim that he's standing near Teresa Halbach, and that one of these bullets shoots her in the skull and exit somewhere, because that has to be their theory, because the bullet that they recovered said and claimed that it was shot through Teresa Halbach. Well, here's the problem with that. Even at let's say 5 feet, let's just use 5 feet. Once the bullet, and I looked up the exact bullet that Stephen Avery used in his, just around the, yeah, well, no, I was just going to say, around the yard and stuff, the ones that was in his possession, he didn't use on Teresa Halbach, but they were CCI mini mags, and I want to say they were 36 grain bullets. So they have a feet per second
back
rate.
The truck way up. Oh, grain? Is that like gunpowder grains? They like
yeah, exactly.
Gunpowder? Oh, geez.
Exactly. So they have a rating, a feet per second rating of close to 1,100. I actually think it was like 1,080 something, 1,089 feet per second. So they have different grain of 22 long rifle bullet. Well, the one Stephen was using was not one of your higher ones. Let's put it that way. So as soon as that bullet would have struck skull bone and entered the brain, it would immediately have lost a ton of its velocity, maybe half, maybe 3/4. Well, you got to think that 22 rifle is, all bullets are lead, and once that bullet hits bone and enters the brain, it's already damaged. So a lot of its aerodynamics have already taken away because now it's mushroom. So now it has more resistance pushing against it as opposed to having that fine point on top of already being a hollow point. So typically, when you have 22 long rifle shots to skulls, and I've researched this extensively, typically what you have is the bullet enters and it goes through the soft tissue of the brain and then winds up coming in contact with the next part of the skull, but doesn't have the power to exit. And what it does is it just kind of turns down or turns up and kind of ricochets inside of the skull, in other words.
Oof. That's ghastly. Yeah. So, our friend, the prosecutor, I think, between the trial and writing his book, had an epiphany that what you're saying might be true. And Christy, didn't he say something in his book, or maybe it was a tweet?
Yes, he did. It's actually in the new chapters that he added to his book. Here, I'll read the paragraph and we'll put a screenshot up of it as well. There's just one problem. The state's actual trial theory was that the item FL, the bullet containing Teresa Halbach's DNA, passed through soft tissue, not bone, and therefore the fact that no bone was found on it refutes exactly nothing. I should know. It was my theory. Nowhere, in almost 7 weeks of trial transcripts, will you find me claiming that item FL was the bullet that caused either of the 2 entrance wounds found by Dr. Eisenberg when examining fragments of Teresa's skull. Just because the state found 2 bullet fragments and 2 entrance wounds does not mean that pair of findings is in any way related. To advance a headshot theory for those bullets, we would also have needed to uncover evidence of exit wounds and other skull fragments. None were found. So there's his retraction. I do believe there was a tweet somewhere. I was not able to find it. If somebody does find it, they can throw it up in the comments of this video, post it on Facebook. I know it exists somewhere because I've seen it in more than just this book, but he does put it right there in his published little pamphlet that he is oh so proud of. So yes, Ken Kratz now claims that the bullet FL never went through any bone and only went through soft tissue.
So he said Brendan said that Stephen shot her 10 times, or maybe it was 15 times, or maybe it's 25 times, and maybe depending upon what day or what hour of the day.
Yeah,
He
exactly.
might have said all those things. So what do you think about that? I mean, so is it in your mind? Is it possible? Two aspects of possibility. One is it possible to shoot somebody that the bullet actually goes all the way through without hitting any bone? Because that's really the one of the key findings that maybe you can tell us about. Is that possible? Number one, and number two. What's going to happen to that bullet after, if it just goes through without hitting anything hard like bone? Can you sort of walk us through that scenario a little bit?
Yeah. So if, let's say that we'll use the state's theory, that way it'd be a lot easier for me to reference. Let's say that Stephen Avery did shoot Teresa Halbach 10 times and they were not all in the skull. They was in different, parts of her body, for instance. If one of those bullets was in the right spot to where it did not come in contact with bone, then that's definitely feasible. So, for instance, if it'd be hard to, find a perfect spot to only pass through soft tissue. But here's my problem. Like you mentioned, there's two different aspects to it, but here's my problem. If it happened like they said it did, for instance, and Teresa Halbach was laying in the garage floor and Steven's standing up and he's shooting down at, well, if the bullet did indeed pass through, once it came out the other side, what is laying directly on the other side of Teresa Halbach? And the answer would be
that's the tarp that he talks about, with that picked up all the blood, the bulletproof tarp.
okay. Well, that's a even more interesting aspect to it. But past the tarp, concrete would be laying there. Now,
right.
If the bullet did pass through, now everyone has seen that's watched Making a Murderer item FL and how the top of item FL is slightly mushroomed. It's kind of round. Well, the reason why that don't match the state's theory is because if that bullet came out and contacted the concrete, you would have a lot more, let's just call it an angular shape than as opposed to a round shape, because you'd have to think the bullet passing through soft tissue, it's going to slow down some of its velocity, but it's still going to have a pretty good bit because it only passed through soft tissue. So when it hits concrete, it's going to deform that bullet, and it's not going to look like item FL looked, put it that way. It's going to have an angular mark, an angular shape to it because it was ricocheted off of concrete. And it's definitely not going to have wood and fibers and all of the, embedded in it, right?
So if I could ask you another question again, this is kind of an aside question. Maybe you've done this, maybe you have. I assume you've gone out hunting and you've shot and killed things and cooked them and eaten them.
Yeah.
So under your first theory, where I don't mean to call it theory, but your first example where she gets shot in the head, and the nature of those hollow point bullets is the bullets are going to ricochet around in the head. Let's assume that she got shot, 10 times. So sorry for this horrific analogy. How many of those bullets do you think would have stayed inside of her body?
Actually, well, that's
most of them?
Exactly. That's what I actually made a video talking about this very point. Let's say she was shot, because I think they found, 11 shell casings in the garage? I think it was.
Recall, but could be.
I think it was. So let's just say that she was shot 11 times. There's no way, and I feel confident in saying that, there is no way that all 11 of those bullets can be through and through shot. It's just not going to happen. I don't care who's trying to say otherwise, it's not going to happen. Because some of those bullets are going to hit bone, they're going to turn, and they're definitely going to stay in the body. So, I would say 50% at a minimum, but if I had to bet money on it, I'd say probably 70% of those are going to stay in the body, especially in the head.
Okay, and if that body was subsequently burned in Stephen Avery's burn pit, what's going to happen to those bullets?
Well, interestingly enough, what's going to happen is the lead eventually, once the fire, gets rid of all the tissue of the body and all that, it's going to melt those bullets. But once those bullets cool off, they're going to turn back into a harder metal, and they're going to still be there in that fire pit for anyone to find.
What they call that, slag? Is that what they call that? Metal slag?
Yeah. They'll basically just melt down, and typically, from what I've researched, is that the bullets, say they was inside a body and the body was burning, typically they'll melt onto bone fragments. So that there's a question of that as well, is that a lot of these bone fragments, if not all, really have no validity in the conversation of any lead being melted on them, in any fashion, and they never recover or claim to recover any bullet fragments from the burn pit.
Well, I'm sure, we know what they did, right? They treated the burn pit with the utmost care and caution, and actually used the front end loader to dig it up, right? And they took the piles of dirt back to the lab, and you could see, we've all seen the picture of Wiegert in his friggin' clean suit sorting through the remains.
Yeah.
They must have found lots of slag from all these bullets that were right. They found it was all found and documented, right?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
If you,
It was. I know where it is. It's with the pictures of the bones in the pit. It's in that file.
That's right.
exactly. Yeah. I was interested about that. I actually spoke to a forensic anthropologist, and I said, well, walk me through the process of how you would process a similar crime scene. And, how they did it was 1000% how you're not supposed to do it. There was no grid. There were no, sieves right there from the screen. There were no photos and documentation. And he said that it's all supposed to be taken piece by piece, photographed, documented, and placed out on a white sheet in the position of where it would fit onto the body, and on and on and on. So that's just another mystery of Manitowoc, I guess you could call it.
Yeah. So I think it's fair to say that again, yet another piece, another lack of real, no kidding evidence that ought to have been there if Teresa had really been shot so many times by Stephen Avery in his garage or in his bedroom, wherever he did it, and thrown onto that burn pit. That bullet slag from the melted bullets ought to have been found, and it simply wasn't.
If I may, while we're still on it, this particular topic, another aspect to the thought that he shot her 5 to 10 times or whatever is there's the lack thereof blood splatter or spatter, however you want to say it. The lack, there's no blood missed on anything. If you look inside of Stephen Avery's garage, what you're going to see is tons of items. You're going to see a workbench. You're going to see shelves and boxes and compressors and, all kinds of different items. If you shoot all of those different bullets, let's say you shoot a body 10 times, you're going to have back spatter and you're going to have forward spatter. Now, typically with a .22 long rifle bullet, because it's so small, if you do get a through and through shot, it's really what happens is it's not big drops of blood that's cast off onto items. Typically what it is, it's a mist. But there are particles that CSI would absolutely find if that had taken place in the garage. So that's just another aspect that I wanted to add in there is there's no way that even if Stephen Avery shot Teresa Halbach 10 times in that garage and he wanted to, he had the desire to find and clean up all of the blood, there's no way he would have been able to. It's not possible. And I've spoke to experts about that very thing as well, and they confirmed, what we're sitting here saying.
Our own Dr. Silk, I'm not sure if you met him yet, Andrew, but he is a PhD in microbiology. I think he calls that microspray, that misting effect that you, and he's like, you can't hide
Probably
that.
so.
You can't clean that up. You can't clean that up. There's no way. So I think what we should be looking for is the receipts for the grime that Stephen put back after he cleaned it up and put the grime back. We should be looking for the receipts for the grime that he used to put back and cover up the
dust
garage.
and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, it's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. Brendan's story was completely coerced. Who shot her in the head? That's a very sad story and a podcast for another day. Returning to FL. So what happens after they recover the bullet? Goes into evidence. Sherry Colhane tests positive, and eventually Kathleen Zellner gets her hands on it. You want to walk us through what Kathleen did and what Kathleen found?
Yeah, absolutely. She requests to be able to test item FL. They bring the state eventually agrees. They send a representative to witness and monitor this item FL being tested, and they bring it to a laboratory, and it's put under a microscope. And what's found on the bullet is wood, red paint chips, and some fibers. Now, specifically talking about the fibers, Kathleen said that she thinks there's cotton fibers on there, and that could very well be true. I don't have any evidence to say otherwise, but I do think that it's still an interesting theory to me that proves even more that Stephen Avery is innocent and that bullet never was shot through Teresa Halbach. What's interesting is my theory is and has been all along that bullet was shot through the wall of the garage. And I noticed in a photograph that there was actually insulation in the walls of that garage. So when the bullet passed through the outside siding of the garage and then through the insulation, the paneling, and found itself on the floor, that's exactly what showed up under the microscope. If anybody that's watched the show, the guy that is reviewing item FL actually says that there's some kind of solid wood on here, and then there's some kind of pressed wood on here. And then obviously, if you look at the picture from the show, you can see little fibers sticking. Now, whether or not Teresa Halbach's DNA was planted with a Q-tip and some of the fibers came off on it, or whether that is insulation that is embedded in the bullet along with the wood, to me, both theories, both cases, just furthermore, in my mind, it proves that bullet was not shot through Teresa Halbach. So Kathleen Zellner actually had a ballistics expert run test trials on an exemplar bullet, and they shot it through some bone, through some ballistic jelly that's consistent with soft tissue of a human. And then they recovered that bullet and took it to the same lab. And what they found was on multiple occasions, so it's to be assumed that anytime a .22 long rifle bullet is shot through bone, you're going to have some sort of bone fragment embedded in the lead. And their exemplar bullet indeed had calcium and phosphorus peak and had bone embedded in the bullet. Well, on item FL, there was no bone embedded in the bullet. The doctor or the scientist, the guy that ran the test on item FL, concluded that there was no bone embedded in the bullet. So you clearly have discrepancies in what the state claims and what the forensic evidence actually shows. And that is a reoccurring theme throughout this entire case.
It sure is. It sure is. Now you did some of your. Let me before that. A lot is made of the waxy substance found on the bullet. And I've heard a couple of things about that. I'm not sure whether you're have any expertise on this or not. I've heard in one instance that it's not uncommon to when you do certain ballistic analysis on it on a bullet
Compare
to sort of embed it in a piece of wax.
Yeah.
But I've also heard that typically it's not that side of the bullet that you use. So there's still a mystery there to me. Can you shed any light on that?
I can tell you a little bit about it, but I think what's important to note, like for instance, what you're referring to is when they stick the bullet on this substance that will hold it still so they can put an exemplar bullet up next to it shot from the same gun to compare the tool marks. And essentially what that does is they can take a bullet from a crime scene and then take a test fired bullet from a gun that they believe it came out of, and then they can compare the tool marks to see if indeed those two bullets were fired from the same gun. But what's interesting to note here is if you do DNA analysis on a bullet and you do tool mark analysis on a bullet, typically, now I'm not saying, I don't want to sit here and say that this is 1000% fact, but from what I've gathered, through research, typically you would want to do your DNA extraction first. Now, why is that? Well, I mean, it's kind of obvious. If you want to do DNA extraction, if you want to wash this bullet to get DNA, you don't want waxy substance covering up any potential DNA, do you? So I think that even further proves that, just once again, this doesn't make any sense, because if you're going to do DNA extraction, you can't claim that is, that's the wax from them comparing tool marks. Well, no, because any sane person, would understand that you have to do DNA extraction before you can contaminate that bullet with the substance that holds it on the machine to compare the tool mark.
Are you saying they didn't do it in that order?
I'm not saying that. I'm just
okay.
I'm just saying that, for instance, when someone uses the argument, well, that's not chapstick, that's the wax that holds it on. Well, no, you would do the DNA extraction before the tool mark. And essentially what I'm trying to say is that it's not unusual to have the wax substance on there. See what I'm saying? But
I do, yes.
And the order of events, how they're claiming it unfolded, I don't agree with that through what, from what I've researched, because you would do, I think it was I personally do not think it was a chapstick that they used to plant the DNA. I think it was something else.
Yeah, I don't know what it was either. I'm not an expert on that. I'd want to, maybe rubber toothbrush on it or something. I have no idea.
Toothbrush would be, yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying toothbrush is, if I had to guess, that would be what I would think exactly what they to plant the DNA on.
Yeah. There's even, I think Dr. Silkman has a theory that it was just contaminated, that Sherry Culhane had Teresa Hallbach's DNA at her desk for something like 4 months.
Yeah, absolutely.
A negative sample. I mean, there was nothing there. I mean, I personally think that item FL showed up under such mysterious circumstances that to me, it's not believable that there wasn't something nefarious there. So it's just impossible for me to believe that this was a random or accidental chain of events that accidentally put Teresa Hallback's DNA on this bullet. That's just too much for me to swallow.
No, yeah, absolutely. I agree.
And so if you take a quick step back, you've used the term tool marks a couple of times right now. Can you go a little bit deeper and tell us what that's all about? Tool marks. Do you have a picture of that?
I don't know. Yeah, there is a picture of it. So, essentially, inside the reason why a rifle is called a rifle is because there are lands and grooves inside the barrel of a rifle. And what that does is when the bullet is fired from its casing and it starts heading down the barrel, if it just came straight out of the barrel, you wouldn't have accuracy. For instance, the way a quarterback throws a football, he throws it with a spiral. And the reason why is aerodynamics, the way it cuts through the air, it makes it more accurate. So essentially you have the same design inside the barrel of rifles. So you have these slight little turns and twists inside the barrel. So when that bullet is fired, headed down the barrel, it gives it, the lands and grooves gives it a spin coming out of that barrel. So essentially it's called rifling, and that's how rifles got their name. And it makes that projectile more accurate and, at further distance. And
who knew? That's an awesome piece of information.
Yeah, those lands and grooves that's in those barrels leaves its mark on the bullet, and that's how they're able to compare and find out if two different bullets was fired from the same exact gun, because none of the rifles have the same exact lands and grooves.
Yeah. Now, to me, it's no surprise that the bullet matched the gun. We know that gun actually did not belong to Stephen. It belonged to the owner of the trailer, who in that land, who was Raleigh Johnson.
Absolutely.
And Raleigh Johnson testified, and they asked him the question about how many rounds do you think you fired on that property? Do you know how many shots Raleigh claimed to have fired under oath?
The exact number, no, but I know it was in the thousands. I want to say it was close to 10.
No, it was
I think two and a half to three. Yeah, sorry.
3?
3,000.
Okay, maybe that was okay.
But
I know it was in the thousands.
Yeah. I mean, so do you think it would have been a hard thing to find those bullets laying around? I think even Steven says the casings he's throwing in the garage just because he didn't want to hit him with the lawnmower.
Right.
The bullets themselves. It seems to me that there have been a lot of them around, including in the garage, because the Averys don't necessarily strike me as people who'd be shy about shooting at some varmint in the garage. So it's not surprising to me that it was easy to find a bullet that was shot out of that gun. Let's put it that way. It wouldn't even surprise me if law enforcement shot it themselves.
Absolutely.
Just to get their hands on it. So that seems to be a pretty easy piece of evidence to manufacture to me. So,
yeah, it's easily replicated, to say the least. But I mean, for instance, I got shell cases out there in my yard that I need to pick up before springtime gets here, and I go cutting the grass. I mean, when you live in areas like Stephen Avery lives or where I live, and you're a gun owner in rural areas, you're going to have shell casings. If you shoot at any, amount of time out there, if you're hunting or whatever the case is, if you have possums getting in your trash, I don't, there's so many different scenarios, but you're going to have potentially shell casings all over the place. I mean, you're shooting things all the time.
How easy is it to find the bullets themselves?
The actual bullet is, I wouldn't say it's easy, because it would depend on what you're shooting at. I mean, if you're just shooting like if you shoot into a tree or something, it's not going to be easy to dig out of there, but if you shoot through a burn barrel or something, you might be able to find it. It really depends on what you're shooting at and how far away it is. Can it pass through it? Because one thing that I've learned that if the 22 bullet can't pass through an item, it essentially becomes a pancake. So
what?
a pancake. For instance, if you shoot,
yeah,
if you shoot it through or into something that it can't come out of, all of its velocity basically turns it into a pancake. So it just kind of smushes all the way flat.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about the fact that there were hundreds of law enforcement and fire department and everything else covering that property. So it'd be a lot of manpower. Looking for if they picked it, it's just not believable that they didn't find one. One of those that they could have used later.
Well, what I was getting at is if you're walking around in the field, for instance, or in his front yard or something like that, you're not going to be able to find bullets just, laying around because they're so small. But there are a bunch of bullet holes in the garage. Now, I've actually ran my own experiment, and if you shot a bullet through Stephen Avery's garage, for instance, what'll happen is it's going to go through the wall, and it's not going to have enough power or velocity to come out the other side. So essentially what it's going to do is it's going to go through the wall and might bounce off of something, and then it's going to land on the floor or on a shelf or something like that because all of its velocity is spent. So the fact that you could find bullets in his garage, or that they found bullets in his garage, especially being that there was bullet holes on the outside, is not surprising at all. But I was just referring to, like other items that they might have shot around there. It probably wouldn't have been as easy, but it would be very easy to find one in that garage because it cannot pass through two walls like that. It's not going to go through one wall, travel all the way across the room, and then go through another wall. It doesn't have the power to do so.
Oh, yeah, and it's been deformed, and it's not in a good mechanical shape to make it through that second wall either, is it?
No, it's not. It's going to be mushroomed.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
Oh, no, I was just saying, it's going to be, when it passes through the first wall, and I believe on Stephen's garage, he had some they had wood for siding, and then they had insulation on the inside, and then they also had paneling. So it's very easy for that bullet to pass through those items, but once it hits the very first piece of wood, it's going to mushroom. The insulation isn't going to affect it any, but once it hits the paneling, it's going to mushroom and slow down even further. And then from that point, it's going to just bounce around the garage and it's going to land. So if you have somebody shooting through the garage a bunch of times, you're going to be able to recover if you wanted to, you can recover all of those bullets inside of that garage.
So do you think it's feasible under your theory that a bullet that was shot on the from the outside could we know that this bullet was not in the garage. They cleaned out the garage. Let's face it, they cleaned out the garage.
Absolutely.
There was nothing there. Okay. They searched under the air compressor. It was not there. Is it possible that the bullet that was shot from the outside, after the jackhammering, somehow fell on the inside? It seems to me that the jackhammering is not going to give it the extra oomph to go through the rest of the wall, right? I mean, it seems more like they fished it out of the wall. How does it under any non-human intervened scenario end up on the floor? I just can't see it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. I can't without running Kathleen ran her own experiment, shooting it through the garage. And that's going to be as close as far as a visual that you would be able to get. But more than likely what happened was, I know this, when I did it wasn't a controlled experiment, put it that way. I didn't have all the same variables, but when I did my experiment, what I used was some wood, closest wood that I could find that was similar to the outside Stephen Avery garage. And then I had a piece of paneling, something, really thin. I want to say 3/16 thin, and a pillow, an old pillow is what I had behind. And it went through the siding, and then what happened was it got stuck in the pillow. So, and when I recovered it, it had wood embedded in it, and it looked strikingly similar to item FL. I mean, I was hoping that I could get one to look similar, but I could have never dreamed to get one, in my opinion, to look, so close to item FL. So realistically, what might have happened is they walked around the garage, seen some bullet holes in the garage, if they didn't shoot it themselves, like you mentioned earlier. Either way, the bullet passed through the first wall, and it could have slowed down enough to where it got stuck in the insulation, or it could have went through the first piece of siding all the way through the insulation, hit the back of the paneling, and then fell down in the wall. There's a bunch of different scenarios without being able to be there to run the test myself, so to speak.
Yeah.
And like Kathleen Zellner said, she even points that out, that they probably fished it right out of the wall.
That wouldn't surprise me. Now we know. First thing I'd like to clarify, in case any guilter turns on that has this great theory that the bullet fell out of the wall. The bullet went through Teresa, embedded itself into the wall, and fell out while the jackhammering happened. Let's address that one first. Do you recall any red paint inside the garage? Inside
I
the
don't.
garage is not painted red.
No, I don't recall any.
It's not.
No, I don't. I don't recall any.
Doc Brown would. Okay, it's not. So that's not a viable theory for how red paint ended up on that bullet. Secondly, to speak to the nefariousness, they're good enough. There's a video where they show, as you might recall, on March the 1st, there's about 6 inches of snow on the ground in Manitowoc County. And they go around the outside of the garage with a video camera to show, before anybody goes into it, after Brennan's confession, that there's no footprints in the snow. Right, so nobody's been in there. That almost makes me believe they've had this bullet for a long time, and just waiting for the opportunity. And we also know that, wait for it, James Link was in the garage on March 1st. And we also know that his name is kind of written in there in a funny way, almost as if he was trying to avoid signing in on the sign-in sheet.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think about that? I personally think they had this for a long time. Maybe it out some other time, and they would just wait for the opportunity for the game change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when I speak about these things, I don't claim one way or the other. My main thing with item FL is this: the bullet was shot through wood. Now people can, there's tons of theories out there on the innocent side and the guilty side, but the one thing that I'm convinced of, and through my experiments, things that I've done, and just I would call it general knowledge of this weapon and this ammunition, my main thing is to refute the fact that the bullet was shot through Teresa Halbach, and especially shot through her head. So there's a lot of different ways that we could come to the conclusion how the bullet got there or when or whatever. My main thing has always been that the bullet was not shot through Teresa. But it's very interesting that you bring that up about Lieutenant Link and everything, because and that they could potentially had it for a while and was just waiting for the right opportunity to set it into place.
Well, it is Thirsty for Theory Thursday after all, Andrew.
Absolutely.
And we don't. One thing that we don't do on is we don't crap on each other's theories. So I apologize if I gave the impression that I did.
Oh, no.
Everybody's got their own theory, and it deserves to be treated with respect.
Right. No, I didn't take any offense to that at all. I was just, I kind of want to just clarify some of my thoughts around it. That's all, because I find all of them interesting, and to be honest, I like to hear all of them. That way, you don't miss anything. It opens your mind up to all sorts of different possibilities. I don't want to be locked on to any one conclusion, but the one conclusion that I do have, regardless of theory, is that was not the bullet that killed Teresa Halbach, nor, in my opinion, did it even come in contact with her ever.
Well, you watch out, because we're going to have a tweet from Ken Kratz very soon that said Teresa had a wooden leg. And then what are you going to say about that? Yeah, right. So yeah, I don't know what to say. So is there anything else you want to share about your video that you did on Item FL with us?
Well, I want to say that a couple of interesting aspects to it, just maybe it could give shed a little light on. I took a 2x4, just a regular pine 2x4 in the video, and I shot a 22 long rifle bullet into it. Now, pine is typically one of your softer woods, and a 2x4 is called a 2x4, but these days they actually make them 1.5 inches by 3.5. So it's called a 2x4, but it's really only 1.5 inches thick. 1 3/4 inch, 5/8, around that area. Sometimes they vary. I was actually surprised when I did the video. I was thinking, for Steven's sake or just for any sake, I was like, man, I really hope this don't come out. I kind of thought it might, it would. Well, come to find out, it didn't, and it wasn't even close. So a 22 caliber rifle, the grain that I was using that was closest to the ammunition that Steven had been accused of using, it didn't even have enough power to come out of a 2x4. And then another little experiment that I ran was, I said, I've always heard this story or theory or myth or whatever you want to call it, that a 22 long rifle bullet can't even go through a phone book. I said, well, I don't have any phone books, and I don't know anybody that would have a phone book anymore these days. So what I did is I took 3 books from the house. Most of them was just paperback. I think one of them kind of was a hardcover, and I taped them together. And I wanted to see if a 22 bullet could pass through 3 books, which is essentially just paper. And I was really shocked that I honestly believed that I was going to be able to shoot through those 3 books. Well, come to find out, it only made it halfway through the 3 books. It went through one book and then halfway through the second one, and then came to a dead stop. And it was basically pancake fragments that was left in the book. So that's just some interesting information, some of the experiments I did in my video.
If you want to run that experiment again, you can borrow Christie's copy of Mike Griesbeck.
Oh, absolutely. If somebody wants to send it to me, I will be more than happy to shoot a bunch of bullets.
I have a couple books you could use for that purpose. I have quite a few. Obi, did you have something to say? I saw you a second ago.
Yeah,
Go for it.
I just
Hi,
didn't
Obi.
want to cut him. There was a couple things I wanted to discuss with this effort, and I've noticed photos where you can actually see when the compressor is pulled out. You can see the back wall back there, and I don't see anything in terms of bullet holes in that paneling of wood, and I don't see how bullet would have penetrated that wall and landed directly underneath that compressor. They stated that when this is
Yeah, so much for that Gilter's crap story, right?
what's that?
So much for that crap Gilter story, right? That theory.
Right. That the bullet had penetrated the wall. I'm assuming, and that it ricocheted off the toolbox, the red toolbox, and that part of the paint came off upon the ricochet or impacting of the toolbox. That's how the paint got into the bullet or onto the bullet. But I've noticed another issue, which is besides not seeing the bullet hole, they state that this bullet, they continuously talk about fragments. They're referring to item FL as bullet fragments, and this isn't a bullet fragment. This is what
A
do I
whole
want to
bullet?
say? A whole bullet. You know what I mean? It's intact.
Can you tell by
And-
the mass? Would you be able to weigh it, for example, and if it weighed between this many ounces and that many ounces, you could tell? Is it that well of a control? Is there a definitive test you could do in that bullet to prove that statement?
I believe that they do have like measurements and weights somewhere within the documents, but they do refer to it as fragments. And when you're thinking of fragments, you're thinking of the bullet like exploding on impact into tiny fragments of shards of metal, and I just can't see how you would get lands and grooves or be able to compare them to fragmented bullets. I just don't see how that's even possible. It's something that's rattling in my head right now.
You got
Not
a
a
comment on that, Andrew?
Well, I think they might have just used the wrong term because you're right. They're whole bullets. And maybe they just used the wrong term and called them fragments, or because you're right. When they mention fragments, I think of you found a piece of the piece, and that's not the case. They found the entire bullet. So yeah, maybe it was just a case that they used the wrong terminology, but I can't, speak to that as fact.
Well, if there's any manipulation of the language that Kratz could do to improve his standing, I'm sure he'd jump on the opportunity to do it. Let's put it like that. What do you think, Obi? How come? Why do you think? How do you think that bolsters the state's case if we call it a fragment?
How does it bolster the state's case?
Yeah, why would they do it? In other words, you're saying, okay, you're saying he calls it a fragment. It's not really a fragment. Is that just to clarify for us what it is versus what it isn't, or do you think that there's a sort of a nefarious reason that they have to call it a fragment?
I believe that there was a mistake. I don't know how to explain how it may or may not bolster the state's case, but
Hey, well, it clarifies for us that it's not a
in
fragment.
several documents, especially in CASO and other reports like from the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, even in like Wiegert's report, they referred to item FL as a and they referred to it as like a fragmented bullet. And I just don't see how that's possible. I don't see it as it being a mistake. I mean, saying bullet is one thing, but saying a fragmented bullet, it's completely something different. But going back to the bullet holes in the wall there, I remember Kathleen Zellner doing experiments with the wall and the garage wall, you know, where they were test firing bullets or something into the wall. But I noticed that a lot of those bullet holes that were in the wall, they were low. They weren't like high up, like up into the chest area.
Yeah,
And
but if it was the red
it-
paint from the toolbox, right? How is that going to evade detection in the 11 November search?
Right. I don't, it wasn't there at that time.
Yeah. So I mean,
I believe
yet
that
another guilt or theory foiled, right?
The bullet didn't arrive until after they had Brendan's confession, and also with bullet FK, I believe that that wasn't even in there until way later as well. But I have a different theory and a different point of view on both these bullets.
Well, it is Thirsty for Theory Thursday, so you know, if Andrew has the time and can stick around to listen to your theory, I'm sure we'd all be glad to hear it. I know you're a busy and influential YouTuber and have to make appearances in other shows, so I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, I wish, but no, I'm good. I'm ready to hear, you know, what Benobi has to say.
All right, so before we get into that theory, I just want to explain. In Dietering's report, or not Dietering's, Wiegert's, excuse me, he stated that the Wisconsin State Crime Lab had contended that item FL was shot or fired from the Marlin, which was item double D. They also contend that item FK exhibits the same characteristics as the Marlin and could have been fired from that gun or any other with the same class of characteristics. Wiegert notes that the Wisconsin State Crime Lab received this evidence on 11/21/05. So 11/21/05. And
11/21/05.
yes, that's in Dietering's, I keep saying Dietering's, apologies. Mark
Wiegert's
report. Yes. That they received this evidence 11/21/05. How can that be possible when the existence of Teresa being or the notion that Teresa was shot hadn't come until after March 1st, 2006?
Well, that seems a conundrum. And you saw Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, didn't you?
Right.
Maybe they borrowed that time machine. So this report was on item FK.
It's talking about item FL and item FK.
That's bizarre. Wow, that's bizarre.
This is yeah, it is bizarre. The 22 caliber bullet was not fragmented. Item FL exhibits 11 remaining landing groove impressions of 16 with a right hand twist. Now, I understand the landing grooves because the bullet basically rides on a track that's engraved into the inner barrel. If the state contends that these are fragments, how can you get landing grooves from fragmented pieces or be able to test on an accurate assertion? Now, if these bullets were fired from the same rifle, or could have, uh, would there have been a possibility to have got them confused or got them mixed up? The difference is both these bullets are completely different.
Yeah, one's flat as a pancake, right? I mean, I thought item FK, how are you even going to get these so-called tooling marks out of something that's flat as a pancake? It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand that.
Ken Kratz, in the paragraph that Christie read earlier, I think he stated, I'm not for certain, but I think he stated that FK, they really had no use to them because it didn't contain DNA, and that it was damaged to the point to where they couldn't recover tool mark. I could be.
Oh, okay. Yep. But yet in this report that Obi-Wan is citing, they managed to conclude it was shot out of the same gun. Weird. Yeah.
Maybe so, yeah.
It had 11 out of 16 impressions.
This is more state shadiness, it seems to me, right? All of a sudden, a brand new item FL appears. Are there two bullets named FL? How is it possible that we have one from prior to March 2nd? That's when it was discovered. More shenanigans, it seems to me.
So my theory is I believe that item FL wasn't the bullet that was laying in front of the tag number 23, which was under the compressor. But I believe that item FL was in the position where the state claims item FK was sitting or laying, which was inside of a crack in the concrete. But when I'm looking at the bullet that the Wisconsin State Crime Lab tested, to me, it appears that that bullet that they show close up with the wood inside of it, where they claim it also contained DNA but turned out later to be paint. That specific bullet, to me, circumference wise and just by the look of it, it appears to be the same bullet. When you're looking at item FL, to me, the color is completely off. It has a real dark, corroded look to it, and it's still containing the copper jacket on it, which I don't see no copper material on the flat part of this bullet, but I don't see no copper tinning on item FKL as labeled by the state. So to me, I feel like they somehow switched them or something nefarious definitely was going on here. But that's my opinion. I feel like the bullet item FK is item FL. And that's the bullet that they tried stating was shot through truth.
There's no end to no end of shenanigans in this case and what they might have done.
And if that's true, then that means that the bullet was indeed planted.
Oh, I think there's 100 reasons that the bullet was planted. They needed the game, and we've been through it. They needed the game changer. Brendan's confession was really the initiation of the game changer. Gives an excuse to go search the garage. Miraculously, a bullet shows up after multiple searches. Two bullets show up very conveniently because Mr. Magoo missed two. And miraculously contains, after all this time, a sliver of DNA. Right? It's just too unbelievably coincidental to be not planted to me. And whatever shenanigans they had to pull, they pulled them.
I want to read this sentence just one more time because of what you just said. Just one more time. One sentence. This bullet was the game changer. It would make my case. Because he had no case. He had no case prior to the moment that bullet came out from, the moment the alleged bullet allegedly came out from underneath the compressor. Because personally, I think it came out of somebody's pocket once they were already in the garage. They went through way too much effort to photograph the fact that there was no snow print, no shoe prints in that snow around that garage.
Right.
Pointed it out.
Right.
They were planning. They knew somebody was gonna accuse them of planting that bullet too, because only the guilty accused and only the guilty worry about things like that.
Right. You and Dr. Silkman, Christy, did an excellent podcast with Linda Kay last night talking about Kratz's book.
Thank you. We're not done.
And yeah, don't I know it? You have said to me, and you got several comments from the viewers online about what they felt that book really was. You know what statement I'm looking for here?
I do. That book is an embedded confession of Ken Kratz. It's a roadmap of everything they planted and everything they did. It's a roadmap. Take out all the fluff, take out all the filler words, take out all the bullshit that didn't need to be said, and it's a confession.
Unbelievable. It doesn't surprise me. You got any comments on that, Andrew?
I wouldn't put it past Ken Kratz to basically frame his book as a confession.
That's what narcissists do.
I mean, the fact is, many pieces of evidence, you can make a case for all forensic evidence in this case is highly scrutinized. I mean, like y'all have mentioned many a times, the key isn't found until the 6th. And who is there when the key is? Colburn and Lincoln. The license plate are found on the same day. The bullet isn't found
by a firefighter
Right.
who said, "Oh, I searched this car because Sergeant Colburn said he saw a glint in this car."
Yeah, and specifically to be on the lookout for a license plate. And then the garage. I mean, as we stated in this video many a times, this podcast, that the garage was searched. There's evidence that everything was pulled out. The flashlight was they shined it under the compressor near the toolbox, and the bullet was clearly not there. And then Link shows up at some point the day this bullet is found, and lo and behold, we have a game changer.
Game changer. I like those words. Game
Yep,
changer.
it's it's a story for the ages. It really is. You couldn't make something like this up. You really couldn't.
Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to sit down and write a novel, you wouldn't be able to write it as crazy as what's unfolded in Stephen Avery's case. And the fact that Kathleen Zellner is doing what she is doing, and she is exposing all of these, getting in touch with the right experts to refute these items of evidence, is hopefully going to pay off in the long run for Stephen and Brendan Dassey.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if an editor read that book, they'd say you have to make the evidence that's been planted a little more sophisticated, because it's so obviously planted. You need to bring the readers along for a little bit more of a suspenseful ride here. This is just so obvious, a little blatant. Can't you put a little bit more mystery into it for us? That's what I'd be saying if I was an editor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing I've always thought about too is, how is it that a jury can look at this information? Regardless, there's all kind of evidence to prove that they just came to a compromise on this verdict. I don't want to get into that, but if you ask yourself, how is it that a judge and a jury can maybe come to the conclusions that they came to in this case? And I think it boils down specifically to what I just mentioned. I mean, Butin and Strain, they called a couple of expert witnesses, but they didn't call some witnesses. They didn't hire experts in some of these areas that should have been hired. So essentially the jury, when you cross-examine state's witness, they're not going to concede information that's damaging to the prosecution. So you can cross-examine them all day, unless you have your own expert to refute the fact and to tell the jury, look, this bullet was not shot through bone. It was not shot through whatever, and that this bullet has wood embedded in it, and this bullet has all the trace evidence of being shot through a wall. Then they only essentially hear one side of the argument surrounding a lot of these items of forensic evidence.
Christy, do you recall how much the state spent in total? Do we have any type of breakdown on how much of that was on expert witnesses for them?
Not off the top of my head.
It was in the millions.
Millbilly knows these answers. Millbilly. Where is Millipedia?
Millipedia.
I could be very wrong here. I really want to say it was over $2 million on the whole case. Was it $2 million?
That's the number that's ringing true to me. Yeah, I mean, they're certainly in the millions.
And I can't remember what the number on the expert was, but I know that. So essentially, the state put $2+ million up against Stevens' measly $240,000. It was no competition. It was zero competition whatsoever.
I'm getting a little sensitive to the time. We've been at this, getting close to 2 hours now. Does anybody have any closing comments for us? Christy, you want to go next?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to say thank you to Andrew for coming on. It was very informative. I think I learned more about the bullets today than I have in the years I've been involved in this case. I really enjoyed it. And everybody, please go check out Andrew's channel. He's an up and coming YouTuber. He's doing great videos, and he doesn't know everything about the case, but he's learning like the rest of us did. And I think we need to show him some support. And also Millbilly's great channel. Millbilly has a lot of information on his channel and a lot of answers. Of course, join us on Foul Play. Join us on the Discord server. Come talk to us about your theories. Maybe we can do a podcast with you.
Thanks, Christy. Ben, now's your chance.
Yeah, I want to go back over a lot of this at a later time, maybe like in a week or two. But I believe that there's a lot of information here that people are not like. It's really easy when you're looking at these documents. You can be really fooled, like easily. And there's wording and things that are switched around, dates and times that are swapped. And it seems like at a later time, like they're trying to cover up these mistakes that were made in earlier documents. And I believe that there is a lot of evidence that shows that this bullet or bullets are just a farce, and that they were planted. But I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank Andrew, Jeff. I appreciate it. Christy, as always.
Thank you, Ben. And just to tease the listeners, you're working on a special project, aren't you, Ben? And we're going to be getting to that within the next week or two. It's going to be very, very interesting. Very. We're all looking forward to that. It's good because I think it's definitely going to open some people's eyes and going to make you go, wow.
We might be here for more than 2 hours that day.
We might be.
It's a good one.
Andrew. Oh, yeah. Andrew.
First, I want to appreciate y'all inviting me on, and I'm very glad that I joined the Foul Play community. So anybody who's listening that hasn't yet subscribed to Foul Play, I would highly advise you to do so. If you want to check out my channel, Andrew Whitehead, Making Two Murderers, I upload content frequently, do live chats with certain people. I plan on being a part of Foul Play in the future, and appreciate, having an opportunity to be on.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And I'd encourage everybody to go check out his videos. You heard the honesty, the sincerity, and the passion that he has for this case as he walked us through the FL evidence today. You can hear that in all of his videos, and he has a really refreshing perspective and style about his videos that I encourage everybody to watch. welcome aboard the Foul Play team. We're going to have to get you on a Saturday podcast with us. That'll be great.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
That
We'll
sounds
get
great.
there. We'll have him on
and,
soon.
and with all that, this has been a Foul Play production.